Hello, everyone. This is our Spiritist Psychologist study group. Tonight, we're going to be studying the topic is the masculine and the feminine force of the spirit. And I would like to hand it over now to Dr. Anahy. Anahy, over to you.
Thank you. Am I able to share my screen?
Yes.
It says I'm disabled.
Just 1 second. Yeah. Is it able now?
Yeah. Okay. Is that okay, Fabrício?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So, hello, everyone. It's great to be here and talking about the feminine and masculine forces of the spirit. So, last year we talked about in our first meetings about anima and animus, but we are going to expand a little bit in the subject, and the aim here it's going to be in terms spiritually speaking, okay, about the anima and animus. But just to remind everyone, I think it's good for us to always try to come back to Jung's model of the psyche, right? Because the concept of anima and animus is a Jungian concept. So that if someone is, first of all, we kind of get more, it gets more friendly with the passing of time when we get accustomed to ego, self, and all the different names, archetypes, and complexes. So we have already seen this, but for people that haven't, that is the same, is the first time maybe. So here Jung's model of the psyche. Okay, so here we have in black the ego, the center of consciousness. Okay, and you can see that in this model, okay, the ego would be here the outer layer, okay, and in the middle here we would have the self, capital S, okay, and of course the ego self axis, that we say, the way they kind of relate to each other. And in this inner layer here, right after the ego, the personal unconscious, where we have the complexes, this C's here, different C's here. And then here in the center, the collective unconscious with the archetypes, the A for archetypes. Just remember that, so, sorry, in the core of each complex, let's say, or the main complexes are archetypes, okay, are ancient structures from in the depths of our psyche, in the collective unconscious, or as we say, it's this synonym, collective unconscious is the same thing as the transpersonal dimension of the psyche. And I found this here. You can Google it, Google images, but I think it's very nice for what we are going to be talking today, okay? So if you look here, remember in Professor Lionel Corbett that we have seen also model of the psyche as, let's say, the bigger psyche, let's say, okay, the psychic world as an ocean, and each one of us as a wave in this ocean. So this is not his model. We have already seen one previously, but I found in the internet, and I think it's great because we have like the ocean here, right? like an ocean. And we have here the physical on the top, physical world or society, okay? And here it would be like the consciousness. And we have the ego, sorry, the ego and the persona, right? The persona that we have already seen, that the ego develops, the social mask that the ego develops to relate to the physical world, to the outside world, okay? And we have here, right below here, the ego, the shadow aspect of the ego, the complex of the shadow that we have seen previously. Everyone that has not received or seen in the WhatsApp group where Fabricio has put our last meeting can go in Bournemouth Society, Spiritist Society, right, Fabricio, and find all our meetings there. So we have talked about the giants of the soul last time when we saw again a little bit more of the shadow aspects, right? Resentment, jealousy, anger, things like that. So our shadow aspects, the shadow aspects of the ego, when the ego cannot deal with some of emotions, aspects that it's feeling and it's pressed, right? That these aspects or these issues are pressing to come into consciousness. And the ego doesn't want to deal or can't deal with this aspect. So it represses, denies, defends itself, and it goes, as Jung says, to a shadow dimension, let's say, in the psyche, in the unconscious. The shadow here, you can see it's in the personal unconscious, right? It's one of our complexes. But also, since it's under the surface of this ocean, it connects, of course, with the collective unconscious, because we also have a collective shadow, right? Some things that collectively we don't want to see, to deal with, right? So all our complexes actually are related in a certain way with the collective unconscious. All our personal unconscious stuff, let's say. So everything is connected, actually. We separate things just for understanding, for this kind of purpose, that we are here trying to understand ourselves, actually, our own psyche, right? And the way that we relate to each other in psychological and spiritual terms, right? So the shadow, the complexes, then we have the collective unconscious here, right? And we have that encompasses cultural unconscious, of course. And then we have in black here the self, capital S, the imago Dei, it's a synonym. And as Joannei de Angelis says, our spirit, right? That, of course, is in this dimension of the archetypes, where we find in this model the anima and animus that we are going to be talking today. And I thought it was a good way, this diagram here, and say, sorry, here in the bottom, the psychic world, the unconscious. So I think it's very nice because it kind of leaves everything under the surface of this ocean. Everything is interconnected, right? And actually in the top, of course, above the surface also. we can see that everything is interconnected, but there are some limitations, let's say, right? Because we have a surface here. So what it's below and above the surface is going to make some difference. One of this difference, for instance, is that the ego is living here in this dimension of space and time, right? Is having to deal with the passing of time, with the relating to the outside world. And also, remember, ego self-access. So also the ego has to deal with the inner world and in different levels of consciousness. Because here you say that we see that we have the personal unconscious, but we also, as Jung discovered, have the collective unconscious that connect all of us, right? So one of the things that I wanted you to realize, and I think this diagram is nice because of this, puts anima and animus here, that the ego has the persona, the social mask to relate to the physical, to the outside world. And the ego counts with anima and animus to relate to the self. Okay? And we are going to see this in a more specific way. But okay, so the anima and animus as archetypes, you see here they are as archetypes in this dimension. They are forces of connection of the self, so that the psyche can fully relate with itself and with the world. Okay? So they are relational forces. We are going to see this better, just for us to start building and joining the concepts, okay? So as archetypes for Jung, they make possible the entrance to the collective unconscious and the experience with the self. They are like guides of the soul for the inner journey to what is most essential and fundamental. What is most essential and fundamental in us? The self, right? Because, as Joanna says, is our spirit. So our spirit is the most essential part of us, of our psyche, right? Because it's immortal, it's journeying, it's evolving, and it's journeying towards somewhere that it's a kind of a faith stuff, and it's very individual. Each one of us has to search for her own answers, but we know that we are together in this journey, in this evolution, and going towards, as Jung says, towards somewhere. The psyche, the soul is teleological. It's going somewhere, is evolving, okay? But let's go to the next one. So I found this also very nice. And don't be afraid, because it's a lot of different structures, but it's kind of easy now that we know already the main concepts. Because here again we have the physical on the top, physical world, so society, objects, people, etc. Okay, we have here, like in orange, the persona, the social mask, and in this square, the ego, right? We have below the ego in gray the personal unconscious with the shadow, and in this diagram I think it's better because the shadow it's you can see here, it's connecting with the personal unconscious, but also connecting with this yellow round dimension, that it's the collective unconscious. So here we see that the shadow is near, it's of course related to the ego, is a complex of the ego, but also is related to the collective shadow, okay, the collective unconscious. And in this diagram, they've put cultural unconscious in the collective unconscious, biological unconscious, and here in the sequence down below, the anima and animus again. And you see the anima and animus always like between the ego and the self or God image, okay? And here the archetypes in this dimension. And then below the psychic world, complexes, archetypes, below this line here. And also something that I found very interesting in this diagram is that in these arrows here to the left, you see the shadow projection, because the shadow would be the gray part, let's say, and it would be projected outside, right? Remember that when we talked about the shadow and why we were wondering last meeting why Joanna gave this title, Giants of the Soul, because you know, envy, resentment, hatred, things like that are giants of the soul, because they kind of because they are shadows. The ego doesn't want to deal with this kind of emotions and aspects, unconscious aspects of our psyche. So it will repress, it will deny, and it will form our shadow, right? But since the shadow is not, we have seen that, but just for us to make a reasoning here, reason about that a little bit more. So since the the ego is defending itself from these aspects, and it's pressing them to the personal unconscious, what happens is that everything that it doesn't come to consciousness, okay, has the tendency of being projected outside of us, projected onto others, okay, in the physical world, in this diagram, in society, objects, people, etc. Okay, and especially in our most inner intimate relationships, because in our relationships, in the family, partners, friends, right, even at work, we have a lot of emotions and a lot of memories that come to surface and that connect. Everything is connected inside of us, let's say, right? So it gives a lot of ground for projection of aspects that will kind of light up inside of us and say, wow, I have this energy. This energy, psychic energy, has to go somewhere, and this is the perfect situation. For instance, let's say an example about, we were talking last meeting about envy, for instance. So I'm envious of, very jealous. There are some different concepts, but let's say I'm very jealous and envious of a brother or a sister, but I love them. So the ego doesn't accept. How can I? Because this kind of feelings, right, and emotions, jealousy and envy, for instance, of course, they are not full of love, right? They are sometimes connected to emotions like hatred, for instance, difficult ones. So it's a paradox, because at that point I'm feeling aggressive, and I'm feeling sometimes hatred against someone that I love. How can I deal with that? Or that I'm supposed to love, right? Because it's my brother or sister in this example. So the ego is going to repress, is going to deny and repress, is going to use the mechanisms of defense that we have already talked about. And it's going to go to the personal unconscious, this kind of situation, conflict, right? But let's say that I'm with a friend, and some time or or in some other place, I'm with a very close friend, that for some reason, in that moment, this friend is very successful in some aspect, or is feeling very happy. And because friends are pretty much like brothers and sisters in psychological terms, we call fraternity, right? Brotherhood of humankind, and fraternity. So it's pretty much the fraternal complex, if we could say, that we experiment in the first moments in our lives when we have brothers and sisters. If we are only a son or daughter, we are going to have a lot of friends later on. So we are going to learn anyway this kind of situations, or are having to deal with this kind of situations. But coming back to the example, then I have some friend, and then let's say this friend got in a situation, very successful situation, that resembles a previous situation from my childhood or teenage years, where I felt very jealous and very competitive, or very envious of one brother or sister. Automatically, my shadow is going to be projected onto this friend. Even if I can't realize, and usually I can't realize. And so it's worse, because I'm not dealing with this thing. Only when my friend gets mad at me for some reason, because in my behavior, I'm going to show that I'm not loving my friend, okay? So this is just kind of a quick example of a situation that it's every day, in work, in social situations with family and friends, okay? So that's one of the reasons we have to travel this inner journey, okay? And you can see about anima and animals that this arrow here to the right, anima and animals projection. So the anima and animals are also going to be projected. And we are going to be seeing that, because remember that in the core, in the first diagram, in the core of all complexes are archetypes, right? So anima and animals are archetypes, as we've seen, forces of connections of the self, but also, since they have the content of the archetype, is always when we incarnate and we develop a personality. So it's the experiences of this personality that are going to make the content of the archetype that will manifest itself. A lot of archetypes are manifesting themselves in our lives, in our development as a personality, right? But the content is going to be with the experience, full of the experience of this experience, actually, of this personality, this life. Not only this life, of course, we have memories and emotions from past lives. We are talking about spiritist psychology too. But Mainly in this life, the contact is always new in this experience, right? So as complexes, anima and animus, they keep male and female images that will influence, our choices of partners, for instance, and our human relationships, okay? Jung used the concept of anima and animus, but that's a reminder, as also an image of the soul, not simply as the feminine or the masculine in the unconscious, okay? So, oh, this is all so strange. No, it's not. It's kind of not so complex. We go little by little. But I wanted to show you very much this because anima and animus in our personal unconscious, they are complexes also. They will influence our choices of partners and our human relationships, but they are archetypes. They are forces of connections of the self, okay? So I brought some, not all, of course, some slides from when we saw anima and animus, and someone that wants to go deeper and understand better can go in the, if a person is in our WhatsApp group, we have all, Fabricio always sends the meeting recorded there, but also go to Bournemouth Spiritist Society YouTube channel and look for for the meeting there. But the concept of anima and animus is one of the most popular concepts of Jung psychology. We have seen that. It's just to remember. Originally, it was created by C.G. Jung to define the unconscious opposite to the social mask of personality, the persona. Remember the previous drawing. Thus, being an archetype that links the conscious ego to the unconscious, and an archetypal image that contains all those features and functions that are present in the psyche in a more or less latent form, but are not manifested in the conscious life and not available to conscious ego because they are in the unconscious, okay, people? So remember that Jung, as I told you, also uses this concept, anima and animus, as images of the soul, because the whole of the psyche, when we are talking about the psyche, we are talking about the soul, okay? So originating in the idea that anima animus archetype is a counterpart of gender identity. These images are traditionally considered as feminine for men and masculine for women. In Latin, remember, anima is the feminine while animus is the masculine gender, both defining soul. So when we are talking about anima animus, we are talking about the soul, okay? This idea both attracts and stimulates the most ardent discussions among modern specialists, mostly because in Jung's time, the concrete definitions of what was considered as masculine character or behavior, or what was considered as feminine, hardly coincide with what is observed in modern times. However, it does not contradict either the idea that the unconscious psyche is a counterpart of the conscious identity, this is very important, nor the notion of the healthy balance of different functions in the psyche that helps the individual to evaluate and stimulates growth and development of consciousness. So remember the last drawing, that it's very important. We are talking about the psyche, the soul. So what is important here? And today we are talking about the feminine and masculine forces of the spirit, right? So when we talk about anima and animus as forces of the spirit, we are talking about the archetypes, anima and animus, and these functions that they have, okay, of connecting the ego, helping to connect the ego with the self, right? And here below there is this article here. You can look for, it's from one very nice article in the site of the IAAP, okay, International Association for Analytical Psychology. And you can find there. So that's very important, because we're not talking today and as anima and animus as complexes. And if someone, and I really think it's very important, someone wants to go deeper and try to understand more about anima and animus as complexes, please go to Man and His Symbols, chapter 3 by von Franz, Marie-Louise von Franz, that it's great there. And you have or you can look for our previous meeting that we have talked a lot about anima and animus as complexes. But here we are trying to focus and to aim in the spiritual aspects, right? So of course, when we are talking about spiritual aspects, we are talking about archetypes. So what is important, it's in the last sentence here, it does not contradict either the idea that the unconscious psyche is a counterpart of the conscious identity, nor the notion of the healthy balance of different functions in the psyche that helps the individual to evaluate and stimulates growth and development of consciousness, okay? So anima is usually related to the emotional, because it's the feminine, right? Remember that. So it's usually related to emotion, to the emotional, empathetic, and sensitive aspects, while animus, the masculine, is related to the active, intellectual, exploring side of the personality. Here, it is important to understand that these definitions should by no means be perceived as literally describing certain characteristics, but that these images serve as symbols and are the abstractions of active animus and reflective anima, principles correspondingly, okay? So this is very important, people. When we are talking about feminine and masculine forces of the psyche and about anima and animus in terms of archetypes, we are talking about the symbolic level of the psyche. And as I told you before, it's like in our world, we are so egotistic, we are so concentrated in our egos that everything is kind of concrete. So everybody keeps fighting and having a lot of arguments, right? Because they are looking at things in a concrete form. That's why it's so important, this inner journey, because we have to understand our symbols, because the symbols, the inner aspects of the depths of our unconscious, they come to surface mainly through symbols, images, myths, legends, okay? So all these images, symbolic images that the self brings forth to the consciousness, okay? So it can communicate what it's precious. Because as we have seen, Joanna tells us many, many times, the self is our spirit, and our spirit is precious because it's the divine sparkle, what connects us to God, to the creative force of the universe, right? And it's evolving, it's going towards this light, as we can imagine, for instance, God as the ultimate life, light and ultimate force of creation. Okay, so in chapter 7, Mirrors of the Soul by Gelson, Luis Roberto, he said that anima and animals can be understood as relational structures that represent aspects of the individual soul. They are relational complexes, as we've seen before, because they have in their function this quality and role in the psyche, okay? The anima, feminine aspect in man, can also be seen like that. And the animal's masculine aspect in women represent the other contrasexual elements within us. According to Jung, as we partially integrate this opposite within ourselves, making it conscious, always when we're talking about integration, we are talking about consciousness, to bring into consciousness. We increase our personal capacity to deal with the complexity of other people. That is why it's so important to understand them as relational complexes also. As archetypes, they represent essential forces of the soul that organize and apprehend reality. They are the universal principles of yin and yang in their feminine and masculine qualities. While complexes, they are personifications related to the historical and reincarnatory context in which we live. That is, images and functions that reflect internalized masculine and feminine contents and experiences. That's why we say, remember von Franz in that chapter 3 of Man and His Symbols, when she says that the anima for man, the first image of the feminine that the boy has in this life is of the mother, okay? And the first image, the first experience, let's say, of the masculine that the girl has in this life is from the father. And actually it's the same thing, but we are talking about the complex, the counterpart of the complex that are internalized, okay? So that is images and functions that reflect internalized masculine and feminine contents and experiences. Not only the example that we have of masculine and feminine, father and mother, because we are going to, during our lifetime, have many experiences with the masculine and feminine, but these are the first in the personality, okay? So yin and yang are concepts of Taoism, we know that expose the duality of everything that exists in the universe for Taoism. They describe the two opposing and complementary fundamental forces found in all things. Yin is the principle of night, the moon, passivity, absorption, the feminine. Yang is the principle of the sun, daylight, activity, and the masculine, that we all have. All of us have these forces. According to this idea, each being, object, or thought has a complement on which it depends for its existence. that complement exists within itself. Thus, it is deduced that nothing exists in the pure state for Taoism, okay? Neither in absolute activity nor in absolute passivity, but in continuous transformation. Furthermore, any idea can be seen as its opposite when viewed from another point of view. People have forgotten, I think, about that. In this sense, the categorization would only be for convenience. These two forces, yin and yang, would be the next phase of the Tao, the generating principle of all things, from where they arise and where they are destined. We know, Gelson says, we know that the spirit does not have sex in the narrow sense that we understand it, and that in its nature it is both feminine and masculine, needing to experience these two realities in its evolutionary process. When in our egoic position, we assume a masculine polarity, our feminine dimension will be more unconscious, forming a partial personality within the psyche. And likewise, when our ego is more feminine, our masculine dimension will present itself as an image in our unconscious. The anima and the animus are forces of connections, and as we have seen, of the self in a relationship of complementation and compensation, so that the psyche can fully relate with itself and with the world. For Jung, the anima and animus as archetypes make possible the entrance to the collective unconscious and the experience with the self, that it's the most important thing for our individuation. Remember the individuation process, the process in this life of becoming whole, okay? So they are guides of the soul, what we call psychopomps, okay? For the inner journey to what is most essential and fundamental in us. Also, as complexes, they keep male and female images that will influence our choices of partners and our human relationships. Being opposite to the embodied sexual identity, anima and animus are most easily related to the erotic encounters and partners and inspire the creative and artistic imagination. Like Eros and Psyche here, an image from the Louvre, right? In relationships, they are easily projected to the potential partners. Remember the projection? When they are as complexes, they are easily projected onto our partners. To the potential partners we are unconsciously attracted to. Thus, the difficulty arrives at the moment when the projections lessen and fall, and the individual are re-seen in the light of reality. The hopeful aspect of this moment is that through this contact with his or her own unconscious depth, the individual, through the mediation of animus archetype, emerges out of the projective illusions, enriched and with a wider conscious spectrum of experiences. Of course, this process is much easier if the experience of such relationships was mostly positive and developmental than negative and defensive. In dreams, the anima-animus archetypes manifest in figures of strangers that are very attractive and invite us to travel to the unknown, because as archetypes, they have luminosity. They have a luminous quality, a sacred quality. The presence of these archetypal images is perceived by their sudden and captivating effect and a sense of being blessed or awakened, like what happened to Dante when he saw his Beatrice. Jung used the concept of anima animus as an image of the soul, the intimate personification of a person's psyche, not simply as the feminine side or the masculine side of the psyche. This is very important, okay? Anima and animus, so are the soul as the soul, right? So the soul as mediator between the ego and the self being our spirit, as according to Joanna, between one person and another, the soul as a source of creative power, as the source of our identity and fulfillment. So images of anima animus. And here we expand a little more, some more slides than the ones that I brought to you previously. It's in the book Encounters with Peace and Health by Joanna, it's chapter 4. So Joanna says, in our personal concept, the self encompasses all other archetypes or is responsible for their existence, especially harmonizing the anima and the animus, whose contents constitute the perfect synthesis with regard to the sexual manifestations of the being, storing the experiences lived previously, sometimes in one biological organization, sometimes in another. During the long process of anthropological evolution, human beings have acquired experiences in both polarities, incorporating them along with their essential characteristics to structure the individualities through which they express themselves. So during, our evolution, as spirits, we have experienced and are going to experience the different, both polarities, okay? The feminine and masculine forces of the spirit. Since the self is asexual in its psychological structure, it advances on the human evolutionary path in search of its individuation, assimilating the transcendent merits of the anima and of the animals, in order to overcome the biological constraints of the physiological anatomy, resulting in psychological and behavioral harmony. So here you see that Joanna is reminding us that our spirit, the self, capital S, doesn't have a sex in terms of gender, okay, in our psychological structure. This is an experience of the ego, of our egos, but that these different experiences are very important to our evolution as human beings and to our individuation process, because we are going to assimilate all the transcendent merits of the anima and of the animals. Remember that anima and animals, as it's our soul, and it's also related to the different forces in our soul, the feminine and the masculine. And like we saw in Yin Yang, right? Ancient wisdom, let's not forget about that, are symbolic of many different experiences, as being passive or active, as being objective or subjective, right? As being a psychological, having a psychological experience, a psychological light, as the light of the moon, that is very subjective, very psychological, very intuitive, or the light of the sun, that it's very objective, very radiant, and it's everything there. We can see very clear, okay? So there are different experiences of our soul. So when reincarnatory experiences are repeated continuously in an archetype and abruptly a change occurs, we have already seen that, animals to animal, for instance, or vice versa, anatomy can be inverse to psychology, giving rise to an individual in conflict regarding his/her sexuality, not infrequently experiencing intimate disorders, emotional insecurity, and fear of assuming the dominant psychological pattern, which is different from the physiological one. But, as says Joanna, a moral education, however, together with a healthy society, we hope to get there soon, rather than late, right? A healthy society will contribute to balanced behavior, free from the unreasonable demands of horrendous prejudice that we have lived in the past and we hope to live in the past, or extravagant moral licenses leading to promiscuity also. So she's talking about these opposites, okay? We need balance, people. We need to understand our spirits and respect, have a deep respect for the experience of each other. It doesn't matter, you know, what the person expresses. We have to respect, because it's difficult. It's tough for all of us. We have the male and female forces within us, right? The masculine and feminine, forces within us. So we are going to experience, and sometimes we can have problems with that. It's okay, because each one of us are going at some point in evolutionary path have some difficulties. But of course, in a moral education, when we have respect, profound respect, compassion, and unconditional love for each other, okay, then we are in a healthy society. So Joanna says that equal rights for all of us, means moral and social progress for humanity, which slowly leaves primitive behaviors to advance on the path of progress, gradually overcoming the strong impressions of barbarism and enabling the legitimate organization of a harmonious and dignified society. So equal rights for all of us, for all individuals, all of us that are, this humanity here on earth. To analyze the emotional content in order to enable the identification of human behavior, now she's talking about the individual, is of paramount importance, so that each person may recognize his or her personal reality, the self. When she's talking about the self, so it's the objective psyche, where we are what we really are, okay, to align it with his or her ego self-axis, right? To be more harmonious, to be more in contact, the ego be more in contact with the self, thereby contributing to a new balanced and happy society. So Joanna says this is the path for a balanced and happy society. That's why she's putting together psychology and spirituality, okay, with the spiritist psychology. The day will come, she says, when perfectly integrated in their emotional, social, and mental functions, human beings will be in harmony without real or disguised hostility without psychological crutches and superiority or inferiority complexes. Such is the aim of life's law of progress. Working to achieve individuation, the evolutionary process will unite all beings in perfect identification of purposes and moral objectives, giving rise to the new generation everyone yearns for. The spirit is free, it blows wherever it wants, as Jesus emphasized in his dialogue with Nicodemus, the famous doctor of the law, and cannot reach the goal of evolution to which it is destined if it is under coercion of any nature. Let's remember this. The law of freedom of thought, speech, and action is conferred on the human being who, in the way she uses it, will be held responsible by her own conscience, which reflects the divine thought. So Joanna is reminding us that our own conscience has to reflect the divine thought. When it gets there, we are striving to get there. And from our previous meeting, 3 slides before we end and discuss, the greatest, Jonah said, the greatest and most pressing problem to be solved is the human being per se. Solving this problem requires psychological maturity derived from serious and well-directed effort, a study of the deep self and the ongoing search for it, which are the most pressing existential goals. So you understand, people, that we have to understand the feminine and masculine forces within our psyche, the anima and animus as archetypes, because they are helping us, as Gelson said, and Jung and Joanna, and we are all trying to study that so that we can connect to ourselves, right? To our spirits, and we can understand, comprehend what we are doing here and what we are supposed to be doing here. And Joanna saying the transience of human condition, the deep self, must emerge and unleash its innate, invaluable resources, thanks to which the psyche consciously commands life, opening the immense range of paranormal perceptions. And we are seeing, as I told you before, a kind of awaken of the paranormal capacities of a lot of people around the globe. In this cast of parapsychical perceptions, mediumistic resources blossom, fostering free transit between the 2 spheres of life, the physical and the spiritual. So if we are going to towards, right, the regenerate world, towards a more evolved, spiritually speaking world, of course we need to develop of our mediumistic, our paranormal capacities, right? Because we understand better and we can move better between these dimensions, the physical and the spiritual, the ego and the self, for instance, understand better the communication between them. Such expansion of the paraphysical abilities enables the deep self, the spirit, to immerse itself in the causality of human phenomena, because we are here in an ego, right? And thus interpret problems at their origin, since they always derive from past experience. And something very important, going to the beginning of our meeting, stop projecting onto others, onto the collective. Let's deal with our own shadows so that we diminish together the collective shadow. so that light can be stronger in the collective unconscious. Individuals are enveloped in the pettiness of egotistical aspirations, says Joanna. They live their lives pressured by the need to project their own image because they feel incapable of overcoming their shadow in order to manifest the strength of the real self, the image and likeness of God, the self, not our body, not our egos. It's the self, the image and likeness of God, created to reach the infinite and attain cosmic consciousness. They are, all of us, we are God in seed form, which evolutionary experiences develop and perfect. And I've put here a message. It was in my book in Portuguese, in the class that I gave about this some time previously. And it was a message that I don't know, it was a synchronicity where I've taken them. It says message from the angels. Maybe I just opened the Google or whatever, and it appeared in one site when I was reading. But I brought to you because of synchronicity. Okay, it was written in my book, and I of course I talked to my students there in the past when I was giving this class in Portuguese. But as a synchronicity, I think it's very strong because why, as Joanna says here, we need to manifest ourself, right? The self, capital S, because it's the image and likeness of God, created to reach the infinite and attain cosmic consciousness. And the message that I opened, that I brought to you, it said a message from the angels. I can't remember the site, but anyway, the core of the message was like this: all paths are right for the soul that experiences them, even in the deepest and darkest moments. Love is given freely. Love is the vibration that lives within and originates all creation. We are in the midst of an enormous shift in human understanding. When we reach love, we allow grace, healing, guidance, the way out of any suffering. Isn't that beautiful? So I will stop sharing now. I have here another synchronicity, but I want to listen to you guys, doubts or anything like that. Because when I was reading again, Joanna, I open at some point, I just, okay, I'll have grab a cup of tea. And then I just opened my YouTube channel. And then what happened? Just to listen to a guy that I like when I want to relax. There was, it said messengers of the spirit or something like that. And it was a lady, I wrote her name, Betty Kovacs. She's a mythologist, okay? And it's great because she was talking about the feminine and masculine, so the forces of the spirit. Isn't that a synchronicity? But I don't know if we will have time or not, and I want to listen to all of you. Then it's quick. I can, if we have time, we can talk about what Betty Kovacs. She's a PhD, a professor in California, and I thought it was great. She studies symbols, what she brought about this, symbols of masculine and feminine and spirituality. But I want to hear you guys, if you have questions. Do we have anything in the chat, Fabrizio?
No, nothing in the chat.
Okay. So would you guys want me to do you want me to say to you what Betty Kovac said, or do you want to make some questions or comments? What do you prefer?
I have a little question.
Okay.
The question is unrelated to the gender of the person, because you can see some, for instance, men with a very anima or animals, the intensity of animal and animals in the person, regardless if it's a man or woman, sometimes is very identifiable, one which is more predominant than other. And I'm not referring to the gender of the person, because you see the opposite. Like you see, for instance, woman that is very masculine, you see men that is very feminine. So I'm not talking about their sex orientation, because you can see that in regardless what the sex orientation is. Is there any reason as why that intensity differ from person to person?
Oh, yes, very nice question. Because then, Fabrizio, when we see that, we are talking about complexes, okay? In this chapter, for instance, Joanna talks a lot about, for instance, the development of feminism and masculine, how do you say in English? I mean, it's male stuff predominant. And help me.
Tomboy.
Is it patriarchal? Is it patriarchal?
Yeah,
well,
patriarchal.
Yeah, or what they call nowadays, I've got now that it has a word, something masculinity, which is like very aggressive and negative and puts women down and things like that.
Toxic masculinity.
What is it? Toxic, yeah.
Toxic masculinity.
Great, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we say, it's because we are so complex, all of us have these archetypes in the depths of our unconscious, of course, and have had many experiences as women and men, spiritually speaking, when we reincarnate, because we need to experiences, to have different experiences, right? But for instance, that's what Fabrizio asked me. So let's say, and putting together with what Joanna says, let's say like women, for instance, that have been historically repressed, and for different reasons. That's history we can learn in the books or talk about, but we know that this has happened, right? So for instance, okay, now we have, thanks to our evolutionary process, we understand that we need to respect each other and the different polarities and the different, the complexity of each one of us, of course. But we evolve as human beings in a way that we have polarities, right? So the movement of the ego is that if I don't like that, if I think that's evil, then I have to go to the opposite because we are in a dual world, right? So, okay, the repression of the feminine was evil. So now I have to go to the opposite. And then, for instance, in a certain way, when the feminist movement started, so there was a lot of fight, a lot of anger, right? But that, Fabrizio, is not the feminine force, because the feminine force leads with emotions. Of course, you can say anger is an emotion, but I mean in spiritually speaking, right? So the feminine force of the spirit deal with emotions, with compassion, with it's not passivity in the sense that I'm not going to act, but it's holding the thing, right? So of course, but then we are here, we have an ego, we have a cultural situation, we have a history, in this material world of repression of the feminine. We have mothers that have had experiences. So when we are a personality, for instance, then I come as a woman, and I suffer all these pressures of my personal history, of my mother complex, of my grandmother's histories, for instance, stories, for instance, and of the history of humankind and of the time and place where I'm born, right? So maybe what's going to happen to me, for instance, if in this time that I'm empowered, I'm a woman, so I have all the rights in the world, and I have and I am upset, for instance, with men, because men are always toxic and don't sad or whatever. And I have a mother that has had the same problem, for instance, and then I identified with my mother. So I internalize maybe her animals, for instance, right? Or because my mother also had has an animals, right? And the identification is in the unconscious, right? Or probably, maybe, I don't know, I had a father that is very oppressive. So all this, I started fighting inside myself. So I have a very oppressive, a very negative father complex. I'm giving you options, right? So what happens to my animals is that my animals will, in the core, remember people, in the core of the complex is the archetype. And the archetype has a numinous quality because it's like Jung says, the footprints of God within the psyche, right? So it's a structure, the archetypes, that it's our spiritual heritage. So it has a numinous quality, but it is in the depths of the unconscious. It's not accessible. It's not even in the personal unconscious, but it's in the core of the complex. Okay, but then as a complex, my animals, for instance, can be really like primitive. Remember von Franz in A Man and His Symbols. And the first stage of the animals, like very primitive stage, she put the image of Tarzan, like Ooga Booga, right? So very primitive animals. So a woman with a very primitive animals, like let's say, can say, I'm always right. And I, like you, Fabrizio said, very masculine in a sense that I'm always right. What I say, I have to be everybody has to listen and respect what I say. And I can be aggressive because I'm a woman, I'm empowered, blah, 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 and all this. Okay, and then I don't respect others. I'm not compassionate because I think, as I have been, I'm a woman, I've been so repressed, and I have a bad father complex, for instance, whatever. And then my animals get really primitive. So that's what, Fabrizio, it's very good, your question, because then we say, oh, we are not talking about gender. We are talking about anima and animals as complexes. And then the woman, whatever, can look very masculine in this sense, very aggressive. But we are not, when we say that, it's just symbolic, okay, people? We are not saying that, for instance, masculine is a bad thing. No, it's a great thing. It's the masculine force of it's not the toxic masculinity, as Don was saying. So we have to understand that these forces, these archetypes, they are going to emerge, or they're going to manifest in our personal unconscious in a very complex, a very complex way of our personality in this life, that it's always connected. And remember when we talked about the self, that the ego is a complex of the self. So our ego, Joanna says, is like a gift for, it's achievement of ourselves, our spirit. We have the right to be here and to have this personality, okay? Even if this personality gets confused and gets aggressive at some point, neurotic, whatever, as I told you in the message of the angels, we have the right, we are experiencing. But okay, we have the right to be aggressive, to be bad to each other. Well, the soul is here experience. We say that God is here for all of us, right? It's like the sun, the light, the love that emanates from the source, from God. It's for all of us, the crazy, the sane, the bad, the evil, the good, and for all of us. So it's a right that we have to have this experience, but we have to learn together. So that's why it's so important. I don't know if Fabrizio, if I answered you, but it was an example to say in the same can happen to a man, for instance, right? That can have an anima that has a primitive anima, and then the man is going to in this personality to express himself, for instance, with very negative emotions, very intense, because the emotions are connected to the man's anima, right? Is the feminine in the unconscious, things like that. And so we always can evaluate, not diagnose each other, please, but as Fabrizio said, we can understand, have patience with each other, and understand that if I'm acting in a certain way, first of all, I have to look to myself, see how for instance, my animals in my case is, we have to go to analysis, the therapy, things like that, or we can meditate, we can think of what we discuss in these encounters and see how is my animals or how is my anima, and the relationship with, my image of feminine and masculine. And I think if we do that, we can express more these forces as archetype, as symbols, and less as complex and neuroses.
So, Anahy, on that dynamic between the animal and the animals, we are talking about forces, right? Do they compete with each other? Do they battle? Or is not like that? It's not, the dynamic is not like that.
That's a great question. Yes, as Joanna said, remember she says that we need more balance. So as forces, we need more balance. Yes, they can compete, they can be against each other. Because if we think the history, we are making history, right? So, and if we think in reincarnation, we cannot say, oh, I always have been compassionate to, if I always had been, and if I always have had unconditional love, I wouldn't be here. I would be that angel sending you messages, right? And not here studying with you guys and try to understand Joanna. So, of course, we have oppressed, did a lot of awful things to each other in the past. Let's not throw the first, as Jesus said, throw the first stone who has not seen, right? So, of course, we have done that. And the history was crazy, let's say, in the past. And we hope the future is going to change in the regenerate world, because we were there doing the crazy stuff. We were unbalanced. So we are trying here to understand these forces of our psyche, to understand ourselves, first of all, to get more balanced within ourselves, so that these forces don't struggle so much, right, Fabrizio? We need the right and the left brain, as we need the feminine and the masculine forces. We need to analyze things, the masculine, right? But we need also to have intuitions and intuitive creativity, right? we need sometimes to be objective, sometimes we need to be subjective. We need to be able to balance these forces. Great questions, Fabrizio. Thank you. And Anne, I think you want to ask something?
Yes, thank you. I was thinking about the projection of the anima animus, because we were talking about the projection of the shadow and kind of get a bit of a clue how that happens. But I was just wondering about the projection of the anima animus, because obviously the projection means that you're unconscious about it, you're unaware of it. And I was wondering if that has anything to do with people who might repeatedly choose a particular type of relationship. Let's say I choose a boyfriend who betrays me. Okay, we break up. I get a new boyfriend and he betrays me. Okay, I get a new boyfriend, and the same scenario repeats and repeats. And you're thinking like, why is this repeating? And of course, nowadays thinking like there's obviously a lesson there that I haven't learned. But we see it a lot, even like cases like domestic violence and things. The woman has a violent relationship, does intervention, social services, blah, blah, blah. And okay, that relationship is over. 6 months later, she's got a new boyfriend, and within 5 minutes discover that he's also a person that perpetrates domestic violence. And we all go like, well, why? You already know this is not a good idea. And yet she said, oh, I didn't realize the person was going to be like that. And she was attracted to this person. So I was thinking about that, if there is a connection to this, because this is something that I find it's really quite hard, because nobody wants to suffer unnecessarily. And so how is it that we, are learning that, that our choices, although they seem like apparently, oh yeah, I went to the bar, met this guy, he seemed a nice guy, we started chatting, we got on, we were all okay. But there is this unconscious drive that is connecting us in a way that we are unawares, because it's coming from the unconscious. So I was just a bit curious about that.
Yeah, that's great. And because exactly that, because for Freud, all projections are symptoms of neurosis, right? Because you are going to project, and it's going to be to keep unconscious, as you said. So he talks about compulsion to repeating, right? Something like that in English. This compulsion that we keep repeating the same pattern because it's in the unconscious. But for Jung, projection was a way of the ego to connect, to make conscious the unconscious stuff, the conflict. And of course, since the anima and animus, as we've seen today, are involved in our choice for partners, as we are understanding now, the way to understand, if, for instance, if a person says, well, exactly, and we see this in clinic every day, oh, I have a boyfriend, and then he betrayed me, and then, oh, I suffer and all this stuff, and then okay, after a period, I have another boyfriend, and he betrays me again. But how could I, and people get really mad when you say, well, maybe the problems, because then, of course, we are talking about that, the person that is betrayed, you say, oh, but all men or all women are like this nowadays, blah, blah, blah. We see that a lot, right? But the thing is that, first of all, we cannot, everybody's like that or like this. We know how complex each one of us are, right? But how? People ask me, how, and could I know? Because I didn't know this person. How could I know that he was going to betray me, for instance, in this example that Anne brought? But the attraction is not of the ego, the consciousness is mostly of the unconscious. So I would say, well, why don't you give a break to having boyfriends and not boyfriend? And first of all, look within yourself to see what's going on. What's to talk about what we are talking today, what's, for instance, if you're talking about a lady who is a woman that it's having boyfriends betraying, in sequence, for instance, and we see that it's different in the name of the person, but it's like almost the same person if you say some characteristics, main characteristics. But what's the problem? It's within the person, because the unconscious is going to attract in a certain way. The attraction of the unconscious is much stronger than the conscious attraction. Okay. Oh, I couldn't know. No, your ego didn't want to know, but in the self knows. That's why it's so important to understand with Joanna that these forces are within us, because we all say, oh, no, because we put the blame onto others. Okay, I was betrayed. Okay, the person can be the person who betrayed had some neurosis, some problems of his or her own, but I don't need to worry about this person. I need to worry about myself. What made me choose the person, right? That's what Anne is talking about. And so if we don't look within, and of course in this example that Anne brought, many times is for instance, unresolved issues with the father complex. And we know that the father complex, the father is the first example of the masculine. So it gives the first colors of the person, the woman's animus, right? So if she has a very difficult experience or a very negative experience with the father, for instance, or a father figure, doesn't have to be the biological father, of course is going to be projected onto a partner. Of course is going to be projected. And Freud knew that because, but he was only looking at the personal unconscious, right? So he couldn't understand, because what he said, well, we have just learned how the ego defends itself to get in contact with this repressed aspect so that we can control better. But for Freud, there was no escape, okay? Once you had this kind of conflict, because you're not going to change your childhood, you're not going to change your father or mother, you're going to own a figure, internalized figure. So you have to just recognize so that you can relate better to others. But for Jung, since he went deeper, we know that father and mother are only contents in this experience that we have. How many fathers and mothers, now talking about Joanna, how many fathers and mothers have we already had in different lives? How many partners and daughters and sons and whatever? So what is important here, and I think it's very important what Anne asked, because I have always this kind of experience, and people say, oh, but I'm going to be alone because everybody's like this or that, and I always keep bad partners, I always find bad partners. But it's, what are you connecting to? Oh, but I want this and that, because in consciousness, everybody wants somebody, everybody knows what he or she wants in consciousness. But the problem is not consciousness. The problem is the unconscious and what it's there in the unconscious. So yes, and many times a part of my inner masculine figure, let's say, that, and part is with the colors of the experience of my father or other masculine important figures in my life, it's going to be projected. So what we say, oh, but poor lady, she's always being, betrayed or something like that. Of course, we are not saying that the person who is betraying the man or whatever is a great person. He also is a neurotic and has problems, of course. But we cannot solve other people's problems, but we can solve, and we should be solving, in a sense of dealing with our own personal problems. So I don't have to pay so much attention to what happened to me outside, But if as Anne said, if I pay attention that I'm repeating the same pattern, why don't I stop for a little while at least and look inside myself and see, okay, how is my animals if I am a lady? How is my animal if I'm, because people get so, sometimes I see, what we see in clinic, and the people cannot stay alone for some time. They have to change partners. I cannot even mourn the end of a relationship, because mourning makes us stronger because it gives meaning to the relationship. But if I cannot be alone for a while, if I jump from one relationship to the other, then what's the work that the soul is doing? You understand? What am I discovering about myself? And many times, and I think this kind of things happen because not because of who we are choosing, but because from whom we are running, right? Because we are running from someone within ourselves, and then we project, and then the aggression comes from outside. But the aggression, first of all, is coming from the inside of me. So it's a great question, and I hope I have answered it. But of course, it's a projection.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's given me a lot to think about. It's, yeah, you have to stop and think. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sylvia, and I think people have to leave, but I can stay for a while longer and answer, no problem.
Sylvia, you're on mute.
I beg your pardon. The name of that professor, you said Betty? What's her name?
Ah, you want to see the Betty? I can put the link in the WhatsApp group. I thought it was great, and we can talk about in the next if you want.
Okay.
Betty Kovacs.
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 Oh, okay. Kovacs. Okay.
She's a mythologist from a professor in California. She's a PhD.
Okay. Thank you. I just would like to make a point very quickly from what you were saying, from what Fabrizio had asked when he said that, you have a conflict between the two. And I find that we do. I mean, I personally have conflict that sometimes, but I think, aren't we, maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I feel as we progress spiritually, we tend to unify that, the animals and the animals, like you said, Joanna says we need a balance. And at the moment, we're very unbalanced. But then, going towards the process of individuation and everything, we will find this balance. And I think maybe society now, we're going, I think things are becoming very, very defined. And it's almost like nobody can sit on the fence anymore. You have to choose a side, and everybody seems to be fighting each other. But I think it's part of this process of transformation of the planet and everything, because the technology now is allowing a lot of women to do a lot of men's jobs. In the company I work for, there's lots of women engineers, even 20 years ago, you wouldn't find any, working platforms in the sea and, finding gas somewhere else, transforming it to liquid and stuff. So I think in a way, this unity, as we come towards a more unified, our spirits will balance these two sides. Because as a woman, sometimes we do need to have the animals. We need to be strong and to fight some battles. Find it anyway. And I was brought up in a family of very strong women, very, very strong women. Things had to be done and they were done. Oh, I'm going to ask so and so. No. But I think sometimes we do need to have that strength of the animals. We need to have to fight some battles, especially a lot of women now are mothers, are alone. And so I think because being too, sometimes being too anima is a bit boring. You see, there's, they cry all the time. So boring.
But Sylvia, yes, remember,
the goddesses.
have you read Man and His Symbol? Of course, we need some, in a certain way, symbolically, we are talking about symbols to fight some battles, but with wisdom. That's what I'm saying, not with aggressiveness.
No, of course.
And the stages of the animals or anima, I think it's great that the last stage, the example of the last stage of development of the animals that von Franz gives is the image of Gandhi. Okay, Gandhi fought in a certain way a huge battle to liberate India, but with peace.
Of course,
right?
yes.
So it's with wisdom. And then we have a very developed animals. What I'm saying is not the animals that it's going to be, discussing or arguing stuff in the social media, getting mad at each other. And remember, I do think because we have the non-dual approach, right? So we are going towards a more non-dual world. Oh, but how come we are so dualistic still? Because we are in a battle in a certain way. As I told you, there are lots of people that I have heard around in Europe and the United States that talking about that we are spiritually in a battle for our divinity, they say, our thoughts of our humanness. I've heard a lot of these terms, right? Because if we get divided, and we know division in psychological terms is dissociation, and dissociation is neurosis, right? Psychologically speaking. So when I see the other as, of course, the ego has to see the other. I'm looking at you guys now, and I'm seeing you as, okay, Sylvia is Sylvia, Anaís, Anne, and Luciana, and each one of us are different people. But at the same time, as the exercise that we did last time, when we meditated together, we were as one at that point. So that exercise that some of us, including myself, were in tears in the end of the exercise, because you can feel the spiritual energy of the self. And the self is the divine sparkle, as Joanna says, and is heading towards cosmic consciousness. It's not something that we find next door or find fighting with each other. So it's very important, I think, Sylvia. Yes, we had a story, each one of us, we have a history as human beings, but we are ascending. We are in the verge of a shift in consciousness that it's one. I think it's, it's very huge in our recent, at least, history, right? So it's very important that we understand that this integration needs us, as Joanna says, maturity, to be mature psychologically speaking. So we need to understand ourselves so much so that we can understand each other. And I agree with you. Here in my state, I know there are some people from my state, right, Luciana, here too. We had to fight a lot, women, because it was very tough, the nature was very difficult, and very few people in the beginning of colonization of Brazil was very down in the south, very aggressive, with a lot of fights and battles and whatever. Battles because it was not war, actually, it was battles because of the borders. And women suffered a lot. They had to be very strong, and it's a nice quality, but not losing wisdom and the capacity to be compassionate and capacity to love. Because remember, the feminine in each one of us, men or women, right, is related to, I'll give you just a spoiler about what Betty Kovacs said. It's great when she talks about feminine and masculine. Feminine and masculine in earlier times had a sacred marriage, and together they created the world, because the feminine is symbolic of the right brain, the heart connection, and the land, nature, and the cosmos. And the masculine is symbolic of all the characteristics of the left brain, intellectual, analyzing, look at something truthfully, rational, objective. And she says that it's a wonderful aspect that we have within us, but it's deadly, the masculine. It's deadly, very destructive if it does not marry the right brain, if the left brain does not marry the right brain. She says there is a poetic logic in it. And our ancestors made it very clear that all this energy must flow through the heart, because the heart connects us to the heart of the cosmos, of the universe. Isn't that beautiful?
It's wonderful, but it's also, almost all the cultures, like the Egyptians, when Ra took the waters and he had his wife with him, so the feminine and the masculine, it's always forever united. But I find that sometimes, because we did have to fight some battles, funny enough, but now like that expression toxic masculinity, which I find extremely offensive, some men have become very, they're almost afraid of being men, and it's, in a way, that's why sometimes women look so aggressive, because now we're not fighting anymore for our rights. Now we're fighting to put men down, and it's all wrong. But I think, you said something about Gandhi. I think Joanna somewhere, she compares Jesus as a complete being, isn't it? That he has both absolutely in balance. And I think that's what we are aiming for in this crazy battles, and to, individuation, and then we be as one. Hopefully.
Yes. Hopefully. Thank you. Hunter, do you want to say something? No?
Who?
I thought he had put a finger.
No, I just clapped, I think, when Anne sort of put her, and I keep on writing down notes. It's been a great session today as well.
Okay, thank you. So I will send you the link. It's not a spiritist, okay? It's a mythologist talking about, but I'll put there for you because we were not able to talk today. And and I have to send you the word text about what I will put in the WhatsApp group about the meditation that we did together last time. Okay. Oh, Fabrizio, tell them about the next meeting.
Oh yeah, so in our calendar we are supposed to be meeting on
the 11th.
Was it on the 11th?
On the 11th
of August. Yeah, so we won't have that study, and me and Anahy, we're gonna see the next time we're gonna have it, and I announce on the WhatsApp group. Is that right, Anahy?
Yeah, it's going to be because it was a mistake. We thought that we are not a mistake. We thought that we will be able to meet here in Brazil, but it was not possible because of all the climate catastrophe. So it's going to be in the end of August, right? And just Fabrizio is going to check his agenda with other groups, but it's going to be because then it would be closer anyway of this meeting. Okay, but we are going to put in the WhatsApp group for you guys. Okay? So have a nice end of day, I think, of Sunday. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.